If you've ever jammed to a Marvin Gaye classic, or danced to The Temptations, or got in your feelings from a Stevie Wonder song, let me put you onto the real unsung heroes behind that magic, the Funk Brothers. Without them, there is no Motown Sound. Back in the day, these guys didn't even have a name. They were just an elite group of studio musicians tucked away in Hitsville, USA, laying down the smoothest, funkiest, soul-dripping grooves ever recorded. Sometimes they'd show up on records under random names like the Twisting Kings or the Swinging Tigers or the Soul Brothers, depending on the vibe. But one day after a killer session, legendary drummer Benny Benjamin hit him with a line that just stuck forever. Y'all are the Funk Brothers. That's how that name was born. But even with that title, they stayed in the shadows, uncredited and uncelebrated, but absolutely unmatched. It wasn't until Marvin Gaye dropped What's Going On in 1971 that they finally got some shine. Marvin said, nah, bro, we naming names. He insisted that the Funk Brothers get the credit that they deserved on that iconic album. The Funk Brothers consisted of the starting lineup: Joe Hunter, Earl Van Dyke, Johnny Griffith on keys, Robert White, Eddie Willis, Joe Messina on guitar, James Jamerson and Bob Babbitt on bass, Benny Benjamin, Richard Pistol Allen and Urell Jones on drums, Jack Ashford and Eddie Bongo Brown on percussion. 13 in total, 13 legends, 13 legacies. And don't get it confused, they weren't just Motown's house band. They moonlighted all over the place, lacing tracks for rival labels and other artists, because when you got that sound, everybody wants in. And still, the world didn't fully recognize them until the book and film Standing in the Shadows of Motown dropped. What started as a tribute to James Jamerson turned into a powerful homage to the whole crew. The drummer, Urell Jones, said it best. People always say it was everything but the musicians, the artists, the producers, the studio, even the food. But I'd like to see them throw some barbecue ribs or hamburgers down in the studio, count off 1, 2, 3, 4, and get a hit out of it. The formula was the musicians. Let that sink in for a second. The Funk Brothers played on more hit records than the Beatles, Elvis, the Rolling Stones, and the Beach Boys combined. But somehow, for decades, their names never really made the headlines. No magazine covers, no awards, no screaming fans. Just smoke-filled studios, long sessions, and unmatched talent that turned Motown into a cultural force. They were the heartbeat behind My Girl, Ain't No Mountain High Enough, I Heard It Through the Grapevine, and literally hundreds more. While the stars stood in the spotlight, the Funk Brothers stayed in the shadows, quietly changing music history one note and one moment at a time. And maybe that's the real beauty of it. They didn't do it for the fame. They did it for the feel, the rhythm, the soul, the sound. So yeah, you might know the voices, but now you know the names. The Funk Brothers, the most important band you never saw. And without them, there's no Motown. There's no soul in soul music. Now that's legacy. Let's give them their flowers. They were the music. Hey, yo, what's going on, guys? This is Kanoa Speaks. We diving into the archives to bring you the moments from history that shaped the R&B and soul genres. Let's set the scene. Detroit, early 1960s. Berry Gordy's Motown Records is just starting to catch fire. Artists are coming in and out of Hitsville U.S.A, and the label is churning out singles like a factory. But behind every track, behind every hit, was a core crew of musicians showing up day and night to make the magic happen. And we're not talking amateurs. These cats knew how to do way more than just play the songs. They were literally building them, brick by brick, groove by groove. And they did it with no egos, no headlines, and no front page spreads. Motown had a process. Producers like Smokey Robinson, Holland Dozier Holland, and Norman Whitfield would bring in rough sketches of songs, but it was the Funk Brothers who turned those sketches into full-fledged paintings. They'd show up in the morning, play 12, 15 hours straight, and then hit a club and play jazz sets all night for the love of the music. They weren't treated like stars. Hell, they weren't even always paid like stars, but their talent was untouchable. And here's the kicker. Sometimes they'd record multiple hit songs in the same day, in the same session. Stop in the Name of Love at noon and You Keep Me Hanging On by dinner. This was more than just their work. This was more than just a job, an obligation, or whatever you want to call it. This was a movement driven by the greatest group of uncredited musicians the industry's ever known. They were invisible to the public, but unmissable on the record. So here's the thing. While the Funk Brothers were laying down these earth-shattering grooves, nobody knew who the hell they were. They were just the band, the anonymous forces behind the voices we were falling in love with. As Motown grew into a cultural empire, the sound became undeniable. Hits kept coming one after another, after another, after another. People were vibing out to the music, but they were never really thinking about the musicians who made it. That wasn't a problem for Motown yet. They were focused on the artist, the glamour, the image. But the Funk Brothers were getting restless. How much longer could they work in the shadows, creating the magic while never really getting a piece of the fame? The answer is not much longer. In 1965, there was a pivotal moment. The Funk Brothers were already responsible for dozens of hits, but things were about to change. Marvin Gaye, already a rising star in Motown, stepped up and demanded change. He didn't want to make it an album without recognizing the musicians who were laying the foundation for his own hits. And then in 1971, what came was What's Going On, and with it was the first major acknowledgement of the Funk Brothers' contributions. Marvin Gaye thanked them in passing. He gave them their due. This album, widely considered one of the greatest of all time, was a game changer. Gaye went full force in recognizing the unsung talent that had made Motown Motown. But that wasn't all. For the first time, the Funk Brothers were listed by name on the album credits. It was a long time coming, but it was a revolutionary moment. This was Marvin Gaye's shout out to the musicians who had been laying the groove behind Motown's greatest hits. But even then, they were still largely anonymous to the public. It would take a whole different level of recognition before their story became legendary. In the late 90s, Alan Stutzky wrote a book titled Standing in the Shadows of Motown, an exploration of the Funk Brothers' untold story. It eventually became a documentary, and with it, the Funk Brothers were finally given the recognition they deserved. They weren't just the anonymous guys in the back of the studio anymore. They were the legends who changed the course of the music history. And the film took the world by storm. People saw the real faces behind these iconic bass lines, these grooves and these melodies, and suddenly the Funk Brothers were celebrities. Their story went from hidden tale to an inspiration for countless musicians. It was a bit bittersweet though, because by the time they got the recognition they deserved, many of the original Funk Brothers had passed, but their legacy remained undeniable. So how does their sound still echo through the music world today? Well, let's start with this. When you hear that iconic bass line in What's Going On, that steady thump in I Heard It Through the Grapevine, or that sweet groove in My Girl, you're hearing the Funk Brothers. And it's not just Motown that owes them, it's every genre. You see, back then, you had regular house bands and then you had this band. They were revolutionaries. They redefined what a studio band could be. Before them, a lot of artists would work with session players in a traditional record and go style. But what the Funk Brothers did was they created a specific sound. They were shaping the songs and pushing them into places where no one had dared to go before. Take James Jamerson, for instance. The dude played the bass with all of his heart and soul, and he felt the song, and his lines became a blueprint for bass players across the globe. He practically invented the hook bass line that you hear in so many genres today: R&B, pop, funk, and even rock. His approach was so innovative that his bass lines were almost more melodic than rhythm driven, and that was pretty much unheard of at the time. Then there's Benny Benjamin, whose drumming was at the heart of the Motown sound altogether, and his approach wasn't just about keeping time, it was about making the song move, making the song look like it has legs and a body and you know, to help the song move. And his approach to hits like I Heard It Through the Grapevine, for example, it laid the foundation for how rhythm and melody could really work together to create an unforgettable song. Their style was sleek, tight, and filled with emotion, and yet it was deceptively simple. They could make a song feel full and rich even when there were only a few instruments involved in the song. Fast forward to today, and the Funk Brothers' influence is everywhere. From hip-hop producers sampling their classic tracks to modern R&B artists building on their melodic and rhythmic foundations. Their sound really does live on, and the Funk Brothers proved that groove was really the key to great music. It's what makes people move. It's what makes people tap their feet. It's what makes people feel the vibe. It's what makes songs timeless. The funky, irresistible, undeniable groove that they laid down became the standard that artists across genres tried to replicate. Even though Motown itself may have shifted gears after the 1970s, the impact of the Funk Brothers had never really faded. They paved the way for a generation of musicians, producers, songwriters, and they taught the world that the feeling of the song was just as important as perfecting the technique itself. They were game changers. And a legacy like this deserves its final word. That final word came in 2004 when the Funk Brothers were inducted into the Musical Hall of Fame. And it was long overdue, but it was the moment when the world finally stood up and gave them their due. For decades, these musicians had been invisible and the unsung heroes behind the Motown magic. And now they were standing tall in the spotlight, finally taking their place among the greatest musicians of all time. Their story came full circle, and with the release of Standing in the Shadows of Motown, both the book and the documentary, it wasn't just about telling their tale, it was a celebration of sorts. It was a celebration of their undeniable contributions to the sound that defined a generation. It turned them from ghosts in the studio to legends in the public eye. For many of them, though, the recognition came too late. James Jamerson, the legendary bassist, passed away in 1983, long before he could enjoy the fame that came with the Funk Brothers' resurgence. And others like Benny Benjamin passed away without knowing just how significant their work had been. But in the end, their music lived on. You hear it every time a DJ spins a Motown classic. Every time someone plays My Girl at a wedding, or they play I Heard It Through the Grapevine on a soundtrack or something like that. The Funk Brothers' fingerprints are on every fabric of popular music. And in fact, the groove they laid down for Motown is still influencing today's sound. The world still remembers those pulsing bass lines and those drums and the sweeping keys and those snappy guitar riffs. The Funk Brothers showed us that what's behind the music is just as important as what's in front of it. Their contributions to music were revolutionary, and they showed that music at its heart and in its soul is about rhythm and connection. And that connection is what keeps the Funk Brothers alive in the hearts and minds of music lovers everywhere. So here's to the Funk Brothers, the unsung architects of Motown, the musicians who laid down the grooves that defined a generation and whose legacies will live on as long as music itself does. Cheers.